Cig, welcome. Thank you so much for your willingness to be here with us today and talk about your work.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Always excited to talk about photography. So it's great to meet you in person, Doug. And this has been a while sort of figuring out our summer schedules. So I'm excited to be here and thanks for asking me.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. And, I have been a fan of your work for so many years. I have one of your pieces and I see your work frequently. In fact, we were just speaking before we started about how I saw your work at Paris Photo last year, and your new work, which we'll talk about today, is absolutely stunning. I mean, the colors are so vibrant, and I'm really excited to speak to you about the photograph that we've chosen today because it's not only new work for you, but also I see traces of your prior work in it.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to just tell you and tell our viewers how much I've enjoyed your photo books. I think the first photo book I saw, I'm not usually an emotional person when I read photography books, but your first photo book, You Look at Me Like an Emergency, I was actually in tears by the end of it because it was so personal about your life and illustrated through the written word on your photographs and your photographs. And I just wanted to tell everyone who's listening today that if they haven't explored photography books, and photography books, as you know, are a world unto themselves for collectors. But if you haven't explored them, your work is such a great way to get into photography books as a whole. What compelled you, by the way, to start making photography books?
I think the book is, I could talk for hours, Doug, about my love of books, particularly photo books. I feel like photography lends itself to that medium. Not that it sort of excludes the wall, but just something happens. Like a picture on a wall isn't, a book isn't a collection of pictures on a wall. It's not a portfolio. It's something more. It's the opportunity to take it to the next step. And if you look at sort of Japanese photo book history, extraordinary work where they sort of renegades, taking work from other portfolios, blowing it up, inverting it, cropping it in. There's none of sort of the reverence of or a different type of reverence, I should say, with Western photography books that normally had the white border, everything contained, everything on the right-hand side of the page. So I just think there's this opportunity to push and explore at the edges of the medium. And so I've always loved books, writing, making pictures, collected books for years and years and years. So it became this natural progression to start making books and teaching. I teach bookbinding, but really the binding is secondary. It's in service for the idea and the content. So I love the collision of text and image together. And it's complicated and it's difficult. And I love that sort of stew, that idea.
Well, let's show the photograph we're going to talk about today. I'm going to just share my screen here so everyone can see it. Okay. Okay. So tell us what we're looking at. The image is gorgeous. It's looks like a young woman holding up a painting. So it's a photograph of a painting and a person. But tell us what's going on here.
So I love the stories behind pictures. That's why I think this series, Doug, is a really good one to take one picture and talk about it. This is from a series, a body of work called Eat Flowers. And I'm not a flower photographer. I'm just happening to use flowers as a metaphor, as an access point to talk about the senses. So this is my new work. This is the ideas that I'm thinking about. My work has always been involved with sensory experience. And, it has always been about using nature, using natural things to talk about what it is to be alive. But this new project and this new book is essentially, really digging in and taking apart what happens in our body, with the five senses, what's physically happening in our body, and then where can we take that? So using photography to sort of push at that and to explode. So the newer work which this is one. It's sort of a riot of color and motion, a lot more motion than some of my previous work. And using flowers as a symbol, as metaphor for sort of living, what it is to, you know, to smell, to see, to touch, to taste, and to listen and to hear. Sorry. So I made this picture in St. Petersburg, and that sort of is a perfect storm in many ways, because St. Petersburg, from the time of Catherine the Great, as you probably know, this opulence, this grandeur, everything was velvet, brocade, and velvet, and this sort of tapestry, deep, rich colors, this love of materials. And so working in St. Petersburg, which I don't normally do, I typically work in Maine, but sometimes we all need a little poke and to see something new. So traveling to St. Petersburg and finding these sort of locations where the light was sort of extraordinary, but also working with the Russian people, and using their sort of fabrics, because while St. Petersburg was very opulent because of politics, because of you know, economy, you know, it's taken in many ways, things have changed there. So a lot of these palaces, there's a palace every 5 steps in St. Petersburg, like literally it looks like the typical facade. And then you go inside, you can't believe your eyes as a photographer. You're like, what am I staring at? These like old velvet, 200-year-old, 100-year-old velvet, you know, curtains, and just this sort of very ornate wainscoting and what do you call it? The top. What's that called, Doug? Do you know? Like
I don't know. I know what you're talking about, but I don't know.
Yeah, very elaborate work. And so to go into these places that have perhaps seen a better day is sort of it, and then it starts referring to time. And with photographers, we're all talking about time, right? That's our currency. That's what we sort of play with. These tiny increments of time, 500th of a second, 1/25th of a second, to talk about much bigger issues, the sort of grander issues of time, existential time, what it is to be human. So I think places like Cuba, places like, you know, St. Petersburg in a way, where time feels to have stood still, or time seems to have moved on, or perhaps it's referring to another time, any place with a sense of history. England is the same, that, you know, the South sometimes feels that with a deep sense of history. Any places like that deal with time, I think you can sense it. And so add that to this idea of what flowers can do sensory. So that was my goal. I went in with these ideas, and then sort of just started to play and see what would happen. And that's typically the way I work. Sometimes I'm more, I want to make a picture like this, and I'll mind map it and brainstorm it and think of talking about why, what am I trying to say, what's the light, what's the language, what's the color. But other times I might go with one idea, one prop, and then just play. And typically those are the pictures that I like the most anyway, because they're giving me something I couldn't necessarily have anticipated, or, you know, beyond where I could sort of thought up. If we stay in our heads, we'll never get beyond, you know, what we know. So so I went to this place called the Demidov Palace in St. Petersburg. Again, it's like this, you wouldn't even know it was a palace from the outside, other than there was sort of these gargoyles, sort of statues, very, very faded and worn on the outside, and then went in, and then there was these sort of amazing empty rooms, parquet floors and chandeliers just sort of left.
And let me ask you, the photograph, I mean, the dress goes perfectly with the flowers, and that painting is in motion, and she's in motion. How much of that was planned? Because I love your reference to mind mapping. Did you have this image in your head before you took it, or did it end up looking like this?
No, both, a mix. So I bought the dress I actually found in Maine, and I took it with me. The oil painting I found in a thrift store in Russia. So it's this sort of mix of, you know, I was like, oh my goodness, it looks the same, it's the same pattern. So it's this mix of things where I intuitively work sometimes, and other times it's more planned out. You know, and I knew I wanted to make to sort of look at this idea of the roses, because part of this project I've been digging deep into the history of certain flowers, the cultural history, the science behind the botany, the visual language, the secret language of flowers. So roses are ancient. Roses have been around since the time of Homer. And there was, this idea that he would use roses when he didn't have time for a wash after battle, which I love I love these ideas of sort of making the everyday from what seems so sort of strange and far away. And so, and also these ideas how roses can be used in medicine, and they can be used to repair the heart. And I read this statistic that 1% of the heart can renew each year. And I love that mix of science and art, which is really squarely where I'm placed right now. So taking these facts and just thinking about 1% a year, that means by the end of your life, you will still have traces of everyone you've ever loved. And so I love that idea that our hearts are these stores, the heart hoards.
Yeah.
So I knew that that's why I settled on roses with this picture. And then it was a matter of just playing. There were a few of us here. This was part of, I was not teaching a class, it was a hybrid class through Nord Photography. And we would all make in the day, and then I lead critiques at night. And so we had some dancers, some models come in, and I knew that this woman could move. And so it made perfect sense to, well, what would happen if you span and danced? And we had a great time.
Wonderful. Well, the work is just gorgeous. We have time for one more question. In preparing for this interview, and I'll give a plug here, I went to Robert Mann's gallery on the internet, which is a great contemporary gallery that carries your work in New York.
Yeah.
And on their website, they had new work. I guess is it even more recent than this? But it looked very different than other work I've seen of yours, because it did not look as colorful. It looked to be a different feel. Can you talk about that?
I'm not sure what they have up right now, but I know the new work, of which this is a part of. This was an earlier one, and so I see references from the earlier work before this picture. Are you referring to, is it One Long Compost?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the new work, some of it's really bright, like so vibrant and almost, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like this exuberance coming out in the photographs. Less of one thing in the frame, more all over the frame, coming in at the edges. And then others, and so it comes from this work, all of this work comes from, last year, I lost one of my closest friends, the battle with cancer, and it was a 2-year struggle. And during that 2 years, so this is a 3-year body of work for me. During that 2-year struggle leading up to her death, she really, she had to go into Dana-Farber and was in a bubble for 6 weeks, 2 sets of 6 weeks. And during that time period, she basically lost access to her senses. It was all mitigated. Smell was really the only sense she was allowed, because it's like the most medically safe. But touch, everything had to be steel first, purelled and wiped down. She was allowed obviously sight, but there was it's like this environment that just is not sensory. So, basically what happened, she would say to me, send me pictures. She didn't want people being sad about it. She didn't want to talk about, what might happen. She wanted to live. And so she would say, send me pictures. So I would go outside and I would make these riotous, that was what I was saying, riotous pictures of every color and this, that, and the other. And she would be like, send me more. It was this like voracious appetite to see and to feel through pictures. So that's what fueled the work. And then, there are some of the newer work when she passed, I was deeply sad, and the work showed that there was this mourning, using flowers as a way. We often use flowers when we don't have the words. If you think about it, during births and deaths, we don't have the words, so we give flowers. And so it was that idea too. So when you see the collection, which will be out in the book next year, Doug, hopefully it will make sense that it goes across the gamut in terms of from being really colorful to less.
Got it. Well, that was a wonderful explanation, and I especially love the idea of the power of art to heal, which
Yes.
your story certainly uh, illustrates. And I think that's a wonderful place to end. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Doug. Have a great summer, everyone.